Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all today. I'm aware there have been some absolutely brilliant sessions during this afternoon, so I hope what I'm going to share with you now will perhaps just reiterate some of those key messages that you have been discussing and those themes, and perhaps put it together in some resources which you can take away and utilise within your teaching. So I'm Sarah Knight. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Head of Learning and Teaching Transformation at Jisc. And I'm going to be sharing with you a very quick overview of some of the research we've been doing into assessment and feedback. And hopefully, as I say, allow you some time to look at the resources and how those resources can support your own assessment and feedback practice. Now, I know many of you have followed our work in assessment and feedback over the years. We started working in this space in 2011, and there were some very valuable outputs and very some informative models that have really enabled many institutions to really move forward their agenda in relation to transforming assessment and feedback with technology. I'm aware that Roger was in the session earlier, and those of you that recognise that graphic on that screen, that is the assessment life cycle that was developed at Manchester Metropolitan University. It has been a really valuable way of thinking about the different steps in the assessment and feedback life cycle. And that is what informed a lot of the work that we did in some of our earlier research into assessment and feedback. If any of you are from FE, there's also some excellent FE resources that we developed, and particularly around the benchmarking tool for enhancing assessment and feedback. But moving on and thinking about where we are now, or where we were at the start of the pandemic, we published a report in partnership with Emerge in May 2020 and a subsequent report in May 21, which took our journey on assessment forward from the original report we did just as the pandemic hit, in relation to looking at the future of assessment. And within that future of assessment report, there were some sort of principles there that, again, I think reiterate some of the themes that we've been talking about today around authentic assessment, around accessible assessment, around ensuring that we are using technology in the best possible way to automate some of the processes, but providing a secure and providing academic integrity of the assessments that we are delivering. Now, recognising now where we are is very different, perhaps, from where we were coming from in May 2020, and certainly during the pandemic, when certainly I think a lot of the effort was placed around digital assessment means and, of course, online exams. So towards the end of last year, we felt it would be a valuable opportunity to review where the assessment and feedback landscape is in higher education in the UK, and look to see what the current challenges are, looking at a principle-informed approach, which is some of our earlier research was based upon, and identify some examples of innovative practice, and looking at perhaps some of the trends in moving forward in relation to where the future of assessment and feedback was going. So while I continue the presentation, I won't break it here, but Phil, if you'd be kind enough perhaps just to put that code into the chat for that Menti, because it would be lovely to see the challenges that you face in your university in relation to assessment and feedback. And I'll just give Phil a moment just to put that code in. Thank you. And I will share the Menti at the end of the presentation, of course, with Phil, because that would give us a nice collective view on some of the challenges that you're all facing. And I think some of those have been coming through in the themes of the chat as well. But one I prepared earlier, and an activity that we've run in a number of workshops that we've been doing around the country in relation to this theme, those were some of the challenges that came back from our previous workshops. And I don't think those are any of those words will be a surprise. I think we see in there that consistency, workload, and cheating, feedback are all the terms that perhaps come through when we're talking around this topic as some of the challenge areas. And we conducted a survey ourselves of the assessment landscape towards the end of 2021. And no surprise, some of those themes and some of those words came up in the survey responses that we received back from members in higher education. You'll see there we've broken down those challenge areas into pedagogic, cultural and technical. And perhaps the most surprising is that 83% of respondents are still reporting interoperability as some of the main technological challenges. But we know that technological challenges are often perhaps easier to solve than some of the pedagogic and cultural challenges there. And as we've been hearing through the course of this afternoon, rethinking assessment design and practice is really fundamental to addressing many of the challenges that we are talking about today. We know that our assessments and feedback practice needs to be more accessible and inclusive, not just in terms of compliance in the legal aspect, but also ensuring that we are more aware of ensuring our assessments are more inclusive as well. And of course, if we design assessments in perhaps a better, more effective way, that does also tend to solve some of the issues around academic integrity. We know we need to develop our students' assessment literacies, and the cultural issue there is students not engaging with feedback, as we've just been hearing from our earlier speakers. There are many different ways that we could be looking and working with our students better to help them understand the importance of feedback as being part of that learning process. So from our review, we felt it was important for us to then consider some of the original principles that we put together a number of years ago. We at Jisc feel that a principle-led approach to assessment and feedback is really important because they provide a very good way of bringing together a body of research of effective practice in relation to this area. They are very action orientated and they can help course teams and staff think about the ways in which they are designing and supporting assessment and feedback in their course and curricular design. So we know that some of those original principles certainly still stand, but that things have evolved. And we perhaps needed to ensure that those principles were refreshed to take into account what we've learned over the past 2 years. And also recognising some of those themes around inclusivity, accessibility, mental health and well-being are now more important than ever, as we've seen over the course of the pandemic. Equally, I think the growing importance of authentic assessment and looking at how that is implemented across many discipline areas is a growing priority. So our new model for our assessment and feedback, which sort of underpins and supports our new principles, shows that there is a real emphasis now where we've moved from the centre, where we had assessment of learning, thinking about how that leads to the formal qualification process, to the cog around that, which is assessment for learning, where learning design emphasising formative opportunities that feed forward to future improvements and really enables all the assessments to work effectively through then leading out to assessment as learning, and really seeing that feedback and assessment is part of the learning process, and ensuring that students and staff are active contributors to the decision making and are able to monitor and regulate their own learning. So with that in mind, we developed our 7 principles for good learning, teaching and assessment. And these have been developed in consultation with staff across the UK, but also having some contributions from staff in universities in Europe as well. And they've been sort of well tested, I think. I've been doing many workshops around the country, and when I share these, they do tend to align, I think, with a lot of the principle-based approaches that many universities are using at the moment. And we can see there that those principles not just echo good practice for assessment, but should be the aspiration of what we see around good learning and teaching practice as well. Now, I will pick out a few of those principles just to give you a few examples where we can see those highlighted in action in universities. I'd also just like to say that I think these are it's also important throughout the process to really think about the ways in which students are involved in working together to help shape and design some of the underpinning concepts within the university in relation to good learning, teaching and assessment. So if we look at principle 4, and I think this is one that is important and growing importance in terms of supporting the development of autonomous learning. And here And there is an excellent example from the University of Glasgow. If many of you remember the REAP principles, which came as an outcome from one of our Jisc funded projects a number of years ago, you'll be aware of the work of Professor David Nicholl, who's now at the University of Glasgow, and he is working with colleagues at the Adam Smith Business School. And I think our principles have perhaps gone one step further than just talking about dialogue around learning, to really foreground the idea of developing autonomous learners and viewing students as partners in the learning community. And a good example here is the work that's going on at the University of Glasgow, where they've taken this idea a step further and searched the impact of a two-stage examination structure. And in their model, the student takes an exam and then completes reflective questions to surface their internal feedback about their performance. They're asked to identify any weaknesses that they're aware of and any aspects of the work that they would like to have expert feedback on. The students then take the same exam again, but this time working in groups. And at the end of this stage, they answer another set of reflective questions, for example, how the group answer differed from their own, and whether the group discussion made them aware of the strengths and weaknesses of their own answers that they hadn't identified, and which answer they thought was better. The purpose of the study was to find out more about how students generate inner feedback through comparison, and the finding was that this process is very powerful. We've just released a podcast which David and his colleagues talk about this practice, and I would definitely recommend a listen to that for more detail. If we're looking at supporting managing staff and student workload effectively, which is always a challenge area that comes up, there's a really nice example from the University of Greenwich in terms of the way that they have produced software that can assist in the planning of assessment. The use of the software is now mandatory for programs approaching the review process, and a printout needs to be included in their review documentation. Map My Assessment offers a visual representation of the assessment type, hand-in dates, waiting, feedback and return date, which allows staff to spot clashing deadlines and also explore whether assessments are adequately aligned with the courses within a programme and enable students to better manage their time. And lastly, if we're looking at Principle 7 around promoting learner employability, there's many examples, I think, across the sector where we're starting to see more authentic assessment taking place, particularly where it's promoting ethical conduct. And there's some really excellent examples in the guide, picking up from the work at Brunel University, the University of Northampton in supporting exercises for apprentice police officers, and the University of Staffordshire, which are using clinical simulation for learning and assessment in what is quite staggeringly a real world environment. And I know there's sort of growing number of examples where that's sort of taking place. So I hope that that's given you a little taster of those principles. Again, I will put this link into the chat in a moment, but we have got a Google Doc there with those principles in and some examples of how you can put those principles into your practice, but also giving you an opportunity of thinking how that aligns with your areas and how you might use these in development of supporting effective practice with your colleagues. So a final slide then to end off with, we have our guide, which the 7 principles are described in more detail. We've got examples of how technology can support those principles and some excellent case studies. And linked to that, we've got a lovely series of podcasts of experts across the sector sharing how they are developing their assessment and feedback practice moving forward. And if you'd like to share your examples, please do. We also have a Padlet there that we've set up to gather examples of practice mapped through to those examples. And listening to the earlier presenter around e-portfolios, there's some lovely examples on that Padlet as well, on how e-portfolios are being used as well. So I will stop there and I will hand back to Phil.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There's been a lot of chat going on during your excellent presentation, so thank you. I've just shared the link to the Padlet that Sarah just mentioned, and I've also shared the link to the fantastic podcast that Sarah did with David and his team. So I definitely recommend having a listen to both of those, listen to that and looking at the Padlet. we've got time for a question. So if anyone has a question for Sarah, if you could raise your hand, then we can give you permission to unmute your mic.